Global business news from the boardroom or grassroots. BBC News cuts through the jargon to add colour, depth and context. With live reaction from Wall Street and Asia, studio interviews with top CEOs and the latest innovations in technology. Talking Business.
Hello and welcome to Talking Business. Here's what's on the programme this week. Ending poverty, decent work for all and responsible consumption, just 3 of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. But can they be achieved without America? President Trump has pushed back against the targets, so as world leaders take stock at the UN's big annual meeting, can business do more to help millions of people around the world? I'll discuss that with these two, the chief executive of the UN's Global Compact, its agency for getting business involved in its plans to make the world a better place. And the former boss of Unilever, Polman, is with us. He'll tell us how he put sustainability at the heart of the consumer goods giant he once ran, and how he now helps other companies do the same. Plus, working out a big expansion. The boss of cult fitness firm Barry's Bootcamp tells us how a new injection of cash is helping it flex its global footprint. Wherever you're watching, welcome to the show. Now, lifting millions of people out of poverty whilst looking after the health of the planet seems like a noble ambition. But in reality, it means radically reshaping the global economy and how we do business. Nonetheless, it's the aim of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. They were adopted 10 years ago at its General Assembly. Well, as it meets again this week, there are just 5 years left to tick off the 17 targets. And despite government spending billions of dollars, more than 800 million people are still trapped in extreme poverty. The specific goals include ending poverty and hunger, as well as making clean energy affordable for all, and boosting economic growth, sustainable industrialisation and responsible consumption. Now, when the initiative began, it was estimated to cost more than $3 trillion a year. It's now thought to be around double that. There has been some progress. 54 countries have eliminated at least one tropical disease. An extra 110 million children have enrolled in school since 2015. Access to electricity has reached 92% of the global population, with 45 countries achieving universal electricity access in the past decade. But July's progress report showed that just 35% of the 17 targets were showing adequate progress. 48% of them showed insufficient progress, and 18% actually fell back from their 2015 baseline. It's perhaps not that surprising because, as one expert explained at the time, achieving them all was always ambitious.
We're going to have to see huge amounts of money. We're going to have to see governments behaving in a completely different way. We're going to have to see companies totally changing their business practices. It can be done, but the real question is whether we want to do it enough.
Since then, government finances in so many countries have come under unprecedented strain, thanks to factors including the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine. As a result, many politicians have shifted their priorities, spending more at home and less on helping others. And that's all too evident in the United States. Under President Trump, the world's biggest and most influential economy has made clear that the UN's targets are no longer a priority.
In the last U.S. election, the mandate of the American people is clear. The government of the United States must refocus on the interests of Americans. We must care first and foremost for our own. That is our moral and civic duty. President Trump also made it clear and overdue course correction on gender and climate ideology, which has pervaded the SDGs. Simply put, the globalist endeavors like Agenda 2030 and the SDGs lost at the ballot box. Therefore, the United States rejects and denounces the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals, and will no longer reaffirm them as a matter of course.
So does that leave more of a burden for private companies to pick up? Well, companies could make or break the ambitions of this initiative. Businesses are responsible for 84% of economic output in developing countries, where they also provide 9 out of every 10 jobs, which is crucial to ending poverty. So to discuss all of that, we've brought together 2 of the world's leading voices on these issues. First, the chief executive of the UN's Global Compact, that works with many of the world's biggest businesses to try to make progress on those Sustainable Development Goals. Sanda Ojiambo, welcome to Talking Business. And Talk to me about these sustainable development goals. As we said, signed 10 years ago now. Give me a sense of the significance of them at the time and maybe how things have changed since then.
The SDGs brought together governments, the United Nations, the private sector, and civil society. So it was truly landmark. But here we are now, 10 years later. And I think the most important and critical thing to realize is the world has so fundamentally changed from 10 years ago. And all of the headwinds that we face are really due to things that perhaps were not anticipated in 2015. And there's a lot of adjustment that needs to be done. But more importantly, we need to keep up that spirit of partnership that really set up the goals for that strong kickoff in 2015.
Yeah, and as you said, so much has changed, so many headwinds that threaten to derail the progress of these goals. What has been the hardest challenge to overcome?
First, I think the COVID pandemic really showed us the fragility of a number of things. The fragility of the system of cooperation, the fragility of human will, the fragility of the assumption that we would all share and share equally. The fact that, we were faced with a pandemic that demonstrated no one was safe until everyone was safe. I think it did, to some extent, build that better, but it did demonstrate huge inequity. I think there's countries around the world whose health systems are still reeling from the heavy impact of the pandemic. There's countries around the world where women and caregivers have not been able to get back to work and earn an income simply because of the shocks that were caused. But more importantly, I think we now know that for true equity and partnership to happen, you really need strong government and private sector engagement to move and to solve for a lot of today's world problems.
And should there be further incentives to encourage private business to invest in them? I'm thinking about things like tax breaks here that might make more economic, more financial sense, and then it aligns shareholders, customers, organisations behind those same goals, because ultimately businesses are in this to make money, aren't they?
They are. It's an investment, and that's exactly what when the SDGs were designed, we were not looking for an altruistic set of actions by business. But there's two pieces to it, and I'm going to start on one that is really structural. Borrowing today costs far more than it did a number of years ago when more advanced and mature economies developed their infrastructure, built their economies, built their manufacturing capabilities, and educated their citizenry and provided health. So a number of low and middle income countries are now struggling because they simply can't access the capital that they need. So that's one part. Capital needs to be available, affordable, and accessible. On the other front, I do agree, in more mature economies, the question now is how do we incentivize that better behavior, but also allow markets to flow and to really address demand and supply, because I think that's when you will get the best of innovation, the best of speed to market, etc. So it's a twofold approach, I think, to addressing how to create the right investment opportunities and environment.
Time is running out to achieve some of those ambitions. I'm looking here in July, the UN Secretary General said that the pace of change was not fast enough, things moving too slowly. He said, let's be clear, we are not where we need to be.
Right.
What needs to change?
We need that broad multi-stakeholder collaboration. The problems we face, if you just look at the pandemic that I cited, or the climate crisis or conflict, cannot be solved by one government alone or one sector. So I think the first is international cooperation. The second piece for me is simply how do you create the right investment incentives and the opportunities for capital to flow. The third, I think, is to look at some policy unlocks and some barriers that are simply stifling innovation and the scale up of capital. This happens, particularly around the world where there's just not enough harmonization between economies and between sectors. So an innovative idea happens on one side, but it can't scale, it can't cross borders simply because of policy mismatches, for example, and policy incoherence. I think we need to look at the overarching regulatory environment. A lot of our CEOs will say that geopolitics is weighing a lot more heavily on their business and business decisions as it has than ever before.
Now, one of the biggest changes in recent years, of course, has been the arrival of Donald Trump in the White House. How much of a setback is his rhetoric around these SDGs? He said that, he's outright rejected them. He says that globalist endeavours like this are, quote, lost at the ballot box. If America is stepping back from trying to achieve these sorts of goals, what impact does that have around the rest of the world?
Well, look, I'll respond to that from the perspective of our businesses who are our main stakeholder. We recently, released a report, our CEO survey study, and the headline from it actually is that 9 out of 10 businesses out of our survey population said that for them, the business case and the investment case for sustainability is more important now than ever. They recognize that for business to be leading over the long term, you do need to embrace the fundamentals of sustainability. On the UN side, there's been lots of processes that have continued. We recently had the UN Ocean Conference. We came out of the Food Systems Summit. And processes are continuing in spite of the rhetoric. But all the same, there are huge advancements that an economy like the US could contribute towards our global progress.
Sanda, if there is leadership like that from the United States, quite clearly that will influence how big global corporations think and what their priorities might be. And I wonder, therefore, if they are stepping back a little, that has a huge ricochet effect, doesn't it, around the world, but also smaller firms.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. The impact of decisions that are made by large economies does impact all the way down to the supply chain. What does it mean? It means, weakened resiliency. It means women and young people that often lead SMEs being priced out of the market or regulated out of markets. It means simply that, value creation is lost. And it is acknowledged that this is truly, an unfolding situation. I think what is really important then is for those who continue to do business to see how they can build that resilience and look at, either finding or making sure that small and medium enterprises can access capital at home, can do business domestically, if they get, locked out of supply chains. But I think it also really provides an opportunity for individual countries to really look at what it means to grow a homegrown economy. We've also seen economies and businesses and industries diversifying and perhaps looking at new partnerships, looking at new areas to sell their products simply out of necessity. So I do agree it's not a simple situation. It has ricochet effects. Businesses that are able to bounce back do it, but ultimately, we do know some businesses will suffer. We've seen this through the COVID pandemic. We've seen it through the climate crisis when there's adverse climate outcomes, and it's a high possibility that it's happening now.
And fundamentally, Sanda, does this not just come down to a question of how we, live well on this planet without destroying it? And to me, that means we maybe need to rethink how we measure economic growth. GDP is essentially a measure of consumption. It doesn't really take into account the cost of that consumption. Do we fundamentally need to rethink how we measure success in the world?
I think we do. Our economic systems are broken, as you say. I don't think we really look at, as you said, what really is the cost of production? How can we truly decouple economic growth from sustainability and our future existence on the planet? And that's why we see these tensions. The harder piece for all of us is then to take action. For governments to create that enabling environment, for private sector to see this investment opportunity and do its best in terms of mobilizing, for citizenry and for others in country to also realize that foreign direct investment will not solve all of the problems. You need to mobilize better domestic investment and also allow capital to flow at the national level as well as internationally for that to happen. It requires reforms of the overall international financial architecture. It requires us to look at how we move our goods and services across borders. So I think human nature will tell us what we need. I think we need to overcome the systems and create the opportunity for public and private and citizenry to really get the best out of that collaboration. And that's the hard part.
Sanda Ojiambo, good to have you on the programme this week. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for having me.
So that's the view from the United Nations. But what about the economic reality of running a company? Balancing competing interests of shareholders, politicians, staff and customers isn't always easy. But can it be done? I've been speaking to the former boss of consumer goods giant Unilever. He now advises other companies on how to do just that. Paul Polman, welcome to Talking Business. Good to have you here. And look, as a boss of a business, you have a lot of conflicting demands, don't you? To shareholders, to customers, to your staff, to make a profit at the end of the day. Where do things like sustainable development goals fit into that mix?
Well, the sustainable development goals are actually extremely helpful because on the one side, they point out where we have still opportunities, to address the issues of open defecation or climate change or food insecurity directly affect many businesses. So depending what business you're in, you understand the realities of the world, but if you flip that around, you also see enormous opportunities. The second thing that the Sustainable Development Goals do is they actually provide a common framework for everybody. And most of the companies that have implemented the Sustainable Development Goals in the core of their strategy as a result have also seen healthier businesses. So at the end of the day, it's indeed the shareholder that benefits from this.
Now, you ran Unilever, that huge consumer goods giant, for years. Talk to me about what those SDGs look like in practice. Talk me through the practicalities of trying to apply those goals whilst running a hugely successful business.
Yeah, it's just one other element that makes you run these businesses better, may I say. I had the fortune to be part of the 27 people that Ban Ki-moon appointed to develop the Sustainable Development Goals, and the only one from the business community. So one of the goals, for example, is water, sanitation, and hygiene. So you take a wonderful brand like Lifebuoy, which is all about hand washing, especially in the emerging markets. With the Sustainable Development Goals, there was a global effort created with all the governments in the world to be sure that every child had an opportunity to have access to bar soaps and prevented infectious diseases like pneumonia, diarrhea. Unilever reached 1.2 billion people, could have never done that alone. We got global organizations and governments behind it. We not only saved millions of lives, we actually had a very healthy business on our brands, not surprisingly. Domestos, a toilet bowl cleaner you're well familiar with. We set a goal that you will find in the Sustainable Development Goals of attacking the issues of open defecation. Still 1.5 billion people suffer from that with all the negative consequences. We built about 100 million toilets. I can tell you the brand grew double digit and was also more profitable. So these efforts that we did were not only the Sustainable Development Goals, not only shined a light on it, if you want to, but it also created these broader partnerships to make them come alive.
Talk to me about innovation, because so much of this will, involve coming up with new ways of doing old things. Yet at the same time, there's such a squeeze on incomes, there's a squeeze on business finances. Is R&D one of the first things to go? Who is paying for this innovation?
Well, it's often the opposite, because innovation actually is a wonderful way of giving consumers better value and differentiating yourself and growing your business. Think about the people that invented solar and wind and providing it now at very low cost. The reason that we now see about 40% of sustainable energy in the world and that it actually is provided at lower cost than fossil fuel is not only important for fighting climate change, but also giving energy access to many people in the world that still don't have that energy access, about 800 million people. So that's the Sustainable Development Goals in action. And you can do this, and you see this fast adoption happening now. So that's innovation in action for you, and it obviously accelerates adoption.
Under President Trump, the United States, the world's largest economy, roaring back from some of those commitments on Sustainable Development Goals. He said these globalist ideas simply lost the ballot box. Is he wrong?
No, I don't know if he's wrong or not. Obviously, in the world, there's a high level of insecurity everywhere. People are worried about the future. Short term, that has been expressed with inflation and immigration that many of the more populist leaders have jumped on, and it has been a certain appeal with a big enough group of the electorate. But that doesn't mean that the people don't care about climate change. People in the US also want to be able to breathe the air. They want to protect the biodiversity. There are many countries that deal with these other issues, but at the same time keep an aggressive green agenda. The other thing is that we are starting to be increasingly aware of the cost that we are incurring if we are not acting. And we're getting to the point that the cost of not acting is actually starting to be higher than the cost of acting, which makes it an increasingly more attractive investment proposition.
Now, I know you work with a lot of company bosses now in your new role, advising them on how they may align behind goals like this. Is it your assessment that, company bosses are prepared to sort of go it alone, that they might find themselves slightly at odds with what government policy is, but actually they see the benefits of doing so, and they're prepared to stake the future of the business on meeting goals like this too?
Yeah, Ben, 88% of executives right now that are members of the UN Global Compact, an organization I used to chair, say that the sustainability issues are more important to them now, not less important. And actually a higher percentage, 92%, is going to spend the same or more in the immediate future. So it's very much on the agenda. What you see because of the political pressure a little bit is you might see too many being silent instead of speaking up on things that inherently they disagree with. Not taking too high a public profile on the fear of being attacked, not forming some of the partnerships that we need to crack some of the bigger issues that are still there. But broadly, companies are committed, and so is the financial market. There is a climate leadership group at the World Economic Forum under 34 companies. If you look at their carbon emission, it's the same as the third biggest country in the world. They are growing 20% collectively, and they've reduced absolute carbon emission by 17%. They show that decoupling is possible, and they're actually more successful. And the returns that these companies get in terms of market value or appreciation in their share price is actually more than the rest of the companies that are not taking the lead. So it pays.
Do you think the way we measure business success is outdated? That we need to reassess how we measure the performance of a business, not purely on that profit number at the end of the quarter or the year?
No, absolutely, and I fully agree with that. And certainly in Unilever, we brought some broader measures, not to understate the importance of having a positive cash flow and keeping your business profitable if you want to reinvest and be long-term successful. I don't want to belittle that, but you have so much better chances of doing this consistently like we did in Unilever over 10 years with a 290% return if you also take care of the other stakeholders. Most of the businesses depend on nature. We need the water, we need the air, we need a lot of things that nature gives us, not only if you're in the food business, but pharma and in many other industries. And yet we have a business model right now that destroys nature whilst we depend on nature for our long-term success. That doesn't make sense. So we need to get to circularity, using resources more often than once. Because of climate change, people are already paying significant prices in their food, for example. Look at the price of olive oil, or look at the price of coffee and many other staples that have gone through the roof as a result of climate change. So the money is there, it just needs to be better reallocated. And businesses understand that. But sometimes it's within their control, and sometimes it requires collective action. And increasingly that collective action is beyond an individual region or country alone. And at a time that global governance doesn't work as well, it puts extra pressure in the system that frankly we cannot afford.
Paul Polman, it's really good to have you on the programme this week. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, and talk soon again.
Now, keeping fit and healthy is big business. In the US alone, the wellness industry is thought to be worth $500 billion a year. That's according to the consultants at McKinsey. And despite a squeeze on incomes, it seems that people are still prepared to spend. The fitness chain Barry's Bootcamp has gained cult status with celebrity fans and devotees right around the world, and it's now flexing its global footprint, opening a number of new sites. And I've been speaking to its boss. JJ Gant, welcome to Talking Business.
Hi, Ben. Thanks so much for having me.
You have a lot of competition now in that market. I'm thinking the likes of One Rebel, SoulCycle, Peloton. In that market where everyone's competing for that spend, and it's quite spendy, how would you make sure people are coming to you and not going elsewhere?
And competition has been constant since, 1998, especially as the boutique industry has grown. And at Barry's, we're so focused on the quality of the experience, right? Our workout goes beyond just what happens in our red rooms across the globe, but it's the minute you walk in with amazing hospitality, incredible locker rooms with top-of-the-line amenities. So it's a holistic experience. And when I think about competition, I think about delivering, a differentiated experience surrounded by best-in-class hospitality and best-in-class studios.
What a lot of people will be surprised by is that, consumers still seem willing to spend on what you call these boutique fitness, opportunities. I'm looking at your thing. It's like $35 for a class. Why are people still willing to spend that sort of money?
It's interesting. One, that's the per class rate, and it varies by market. But You can also take class at lower price via the purchase of larger packages or memberships. Our clients are hungry not only just for a great workout, but really for experience and community. And frankly, you can't replicate that at home or in a traditional gym model.
What do tariffs mean for you? Because the economic landscape has shifted quite a lot under President Trump. You've got to import a lot of equipment to your sites right around the world. How much extra does that cost you?
We are affected by tariffs just like everyone else, right? In the cost of our goods, and we have a very robust retail business, right? In which we sell Barry's branded apparel. So the team has been hard at work to analyze the impact of tariffs across the business. We constantly evaluate strategies to try to mitigate the cost there, but we're subject to the same pressures that anyone else is subject to.
Do you have to put up prices, do you think?
Typically, every January, we look at what's happening in the economy, what's happening in the local market, and adjust prices based on those factors.
Yeah, the reason I ask is I wonder what that tipping point is, that if you're paying, say, $35 for a class, for example, and then tariffs and other economic pressures mean that you have to pass some of that on to consumers, maybe it gets to $40 a class. Is that the point when people go, I like going, but I can't spend $40 on it?
From my perspective, we're so focused on the quality, right? And when I think about price, it also relates to value. And it's incumbent on us to make sure that we're delivering the value to our clients, right? Because I think it goes beyond price. It goes to what do our clients value? Why are they coming to us? And how do we continue to reinforce the quality of the product under these external pressures?
JJ Gang, good to talk to you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
That's all for this week. You can keep up to date with all the latest on the global economy on the BBC News website and app. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Hello. The heavy rain through Saturday and into the night means there are a number of flood warnings in place at the moment. Hopefully the numbers should start to come down as you go through Sunday due to slightly more in the way of drier weather around, a bit of sunshine at times, a scattering of showers, but a cooler breeze. This is air of low pressure which is pulling away, taking the stronger winds away with it as well.